Yvonne Knudsen, and I am the president-elect for GDMA. This is my second year in service with GDMA, and I'm glad to invite back Lieutenant Governor Denny for this opportunity to have an intimate conversation during our lunch hour. So thank you for joining us. Denny was elected Washington State's 17th Lieutenant Governor in November of 2020. He had previously been elected to serve 5 terms in the State House of Representatives and was selected by his colleagues to be House Majority Leader. Additionally, Lieutenant Governor grew several small businesses in Washington State, co-founded TBW, the nation's prominent statewide public affairs network, and served as the first United States representative for Washington's 10th Congressional District. As Lieutenant Governor, he is the president of Washington State Senate and serves as chair of both the Senate Rules Committee and the Legislative Committee of Economic Development and International Relations. In addition, Governor serves as acting governor whenever Governor Inslee is out of state and runs his own small agency whose key issues include economic development, housing, international relations. Lieutenant Governor currently serves as the advisory committee of the Export-Import Bank of the United States and is a member of the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors. And thank you all for letting me bumble through that, that introduction. With that, take it away, Lieutenant Governor.
Yvonne, thank you very much. So I want to start out by thanking you for the opportunity to be here and apologizing again for having been interrupted when we were together last March or whenever it was, and we got called into session. I had to run upstairs and preside. So thank you very much. More importantly, thank you for what you do every day, day in and day out. A wise friend of mine once told me, as somebody who has functioned most of my career in the policy arena, that it's really important for us to remember that without implementation, there is no policy. So you are the other half of what it is that we all do. And I thank you for that, especially since you obviously, by virtue of membership in this organization, do it exceedingly well. It's a program that actually tugs at my heartstrings. One of the things that Yvonne didn't mention, I don't think, was that I had the privilege to serve as Chief of Staff to Governor Booth Gardner. And on at least 2 occasions during that time, he was unable to be at the ceremony to present the awards to distinguished managers, and I was his stand-in. And what means so much to me about all of that is, frankly, for years later, including up until recently, I would run into somebody at the local Safeway and they would say, "Oh, Denny, you gave me my Distinguished Managers Award, 30 years ago." It was a really important and meaningful moment in my life. And of course, that's just very heartwarming. So listen, I'm much more interested in having this be the conversation and much less interested in talking at you. I do want, however, just to frame this up by dispelling some of the myths associated with what the job of Lieutenant Governor is. Because I find that people have a vast misunderstanding about what this job really is. It's really 3 things. The first of which is I'm the insurance policy in case the governor gets hit by a bus, by which I mean, according to our Constitution, I would automatically become the governor. And as Yvonne mentioned, I am the acting governor whenever the governor leaves Washington State airspace. He's doing that at the end of next week. You should all prepare assiduously for this event, I might add. Secondly, as also mentioned, I am the presiding officer and the president of the Washington State Senate. My job there is to faithfully apply the rules and uphold a standard and tenor of civility, I think, during the sometimes pretty hard-fought disagreements of opinion we have about what policy direction to take. And in that capacity, I don't actually have a vote. People come up to me all the time and say, "Well, why don't you introduce a bill to do X, Y, or Z?" And my answer is because as Lieutenant Governor, I don't have the authority to introduce legislation. I'm the presiding officer. I'm not the 50th state senator. Although I can break ties, and I do have by tradition the position of chairmanship of the Rules Committee that actually sets the agenda for the floor. And then third and lastly is, of course, like with all of you, other duties as assigned, and these are very numerous. For example, I am by statute a member of 10 boards and commissions. And in fact, I chair the Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations, as Yvonne mentioned. That's what the Lieutenant Governor actually does. So with that, with a realistic framework of what it is this job really is, I'm eager, anxious, and looking forward to getting into your questions. Who's driving the train, Yvonne?
I think JR has the first question for you today.
I do. Thank you so much. So this year, our theme for GDMA is 2021 and beyond, and really around leadership, because we've experienced so many changes in how our teams come together, collaborate, work together. The past couple of years, I think that has really changed the landscape of not only what we do with work, but also where we do it and how we do it. So I'm curious how you see, or how you're seeing, the landscape of leadership shifting, or of work shifting, as we move forward, contemplating doing work a different way or more remotely.
Great question, JR. So there are two characteristics of the current work environment that I think are fairly new. One's very new, and the other is a little bit longer standing, that necessarily impact how it is that we engage in the workplace. The first of which is the social media context. I've been pretty clear about and outspoken about the fact that I think this has had a mostly negative effect on civic discourse in America. It is as though we cannot litigate public policy disagreements without becoming highly personal. And people are incentivized to do such, right? The snarkier you are about how it is you express your disagreement with somebody, the more followers you have, which is power, in effect. So we're all going to have to figure out and evolve, I hope, to some place where we can have these policy disagreements and pursue those disagreements to successful conclusion without it just tearing at the fabric of our country. The second issue, and boy, I'd really rather hear from all of you on this, is the issue of remote work. I don't think we're entirely going back to where we were. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I have members of my family who work in state government and have managerial roles, and I ask them every time I talk to them, where are your people at? Where are you at? What do you think this is going to look like when we are hopefully completely beyond the restrictions of the pandemic? And I have come to the conclusion that we're not going back to 8 to 5 physical presence in the workplace. But what that's going to look like and how we're going to adapt, I think, frankly, a lot of that burden is going to fall on your shoulders as the managers and leaders in state government. If anybody has anything they want to share with me about where they think this is going, I would be very interested in it. Not to turn the question tables around on you, JR, but I'm truly interested in what those of you who are trying to get things done are seeing as the trend lines here, what the upside is, what the downside is. And let me just finally say, I don't think we're ever going to be completely remote, because what I believe in my heart of hearts is that Homo sapiens is able to advance and make the kind of progress it does scientifically, technologically, and even organizationally, because we are at our cellular level, at the DNA level, very social beings. And if you really want to kind of evaluate the question is, why is it that Homo sapiens has been able to do this versus other species of animals? I would argue that it's not just the size of our brain, and it's not just our opposable thumbs, but it is this ability to collaborate across disciplines and work with one another to solve problems that is more powerful than just doing things on its own. I happen to be writing a novel about quantum computing, so I like to use this example. Thomas Edison may have been able to invent by himself alone in the lab the light bulb, but I guarantee you we're not going to get to quantum computing that doesn't involve thousands, tens of thousands of people working across disciplines and collaborative. So where do you guys think this is going?
That's such a great question. I think that we would all have different answers, and I'm going to leave space too for folks to raise their hand and share. I'll tell you from my perspective and the teams that I've led is that I feel like it's really opened up access and equity, meaning that it's given us a new way to interact. So for those that it worked really well being in person, we could still have that opportunity. And for those that have other things going on in life where they need the flexibility, and technology allows for it. So I'll tell you, when I first started, I was like, nope, I need to be back in the office right away. There's no way I can collaborate with my teams. But as we've moved through this and we've tried stuff, we found new and different ways to collaborate that has allowed voices that wouldn't always show up when we were actually in person. So I really think that I think it's beneficial to take full advantage of the best of both, the best of what happens in in-person collaboration and the flexibility of being able to have virtual collaboration. So I think that's at least where I see it.
Do you think your teams are as productive, JR?
Yes, I would say yes. And I say yes, not at first, right? Like it took time to get there. And I think that you always have folks that a different work environment works best for them, but we haven't seen a dip in productivity. I mean, they're back at or above service levels. And for some, they really want to keep the environment. Others really want to go back in, and there's different personal reasons. So I think it gives us an opportunity to really do more to be that employer of choice. And of course, still meet the needs of our constituents and our customers and our service, but also meet the needs of the teams that we lead and serve on an individual level that I think is pretty exciting. But that's just my opinion. So I'm super excited to hear others who might be on the call.
And we do have Sue L with her hand up. And Sue, what I'm going to do is give you the platform to just go ahead and speak directly to the Lieutenant Governor.
Hi, Lieutenant Governor. My name is Sue Langen, and I'm the Deputy Director at the Washington Technology Services. And one of the things that that we're seeing in the technology world is, we got to compete with private sector, and it's hard to do that with state government wages. And as long as private sector is embracing telework from a technology perspective, if we don't, we're out of the market. And I think with cloud computing and other advances, most technology staff can work remotely, and it'll be a game changer in who we're able to bring into the workforce and who we keep in the workforce.
Good observations. Thank you. Anybody else? This is fascinating to me. I love this.
So I'm going to jump into the conversation, and I think only timely because my position with OFM is facilities oversight and planning. So I'm super excited to weigh in on this particular piece of conversation, as we are actually taking private sector trending, sharing that with facility planners, and starting this conversation across the board as we look at how do we collect the right sets of data. Obviously, this data has been absent from our workforce, so that we can better tell the story in a way that's meaningful. So I think the question, Lieutenant Governor, is super timely. And some of the things we're seeing are different hypotheses being tested by different sectors. And so I think it's super important that we're all still keeping them in our heads. The science behind decision making and problem solving is, do we have enough information to make these decisions? Are we collecting the right subsets of data to do that? And then how do we do that in a way that's responsive along the way? So these conversations, I know I'm looking at the people who are attending this call right now, knowing that these conversations are happening in so many subgroups across government right now. And I feel like the innovative ideas are flowing. And I'm only 2 months new into OFM in this position, so I can't wait to have more to share with you about this in the future.
So Yvonne, if everybody is saying we're not going entirely back, but we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, How then, however, does that not translate to we're not going to need as much office space and our transportation planning for the workforce is going to have to change? How does that not translate to that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think you're seeing all different types of trending in this area, right? I mean, we also have like the slow tick of growth. At the same time, you also are trying to determine what does collaborative space look like for a group that's hybrid. So is possibly some hypothesis look like different levels of assigned seating, different types of assigned seating, different ways to connect with the private sector as we move forward in this world. And I think those are all too many unknowns for us to really determine square foot to the problem quite yet. I think you're right. Yes, it's going to look something like that, but what without looking at all of those denominators would be absent fact. So that's part of the conversation that we're beginning to have. And with that, I see so many hands up and other people having questions here. Ken has his hand up. I want to give him platform to go ahead.
Thanks, Yvonne. So Denny, I would say, and I'm at the Department of Revenue. So, but this sort of spans across all agencies, and obviously there are lots of job openings now. Everybody is out there trying to hire. I think that last time I heard there was 1,500 job postings as of yesterday. So and that's across state government. But one of you hit on something with I think Yvonne's right. It's too early to know necessarily what it's ultimately going to look like, because we need, as people go back, to a certain degree, probably not 100%, you're right, probably not 100% remote either, but it's somewhere in the middle there. And what that sweet spot is we'll have to sort of figure that out. But within that is the culture. It was mentioned about maybe we can't we can't compete dollar wise, right? And that's not a new issue with state government. That's many government agencies. That's just not a new issue. But how you compete is the culture that you create within your agency, the things that you have to sort of tout, the things that are not as financially pleasing to some people, but you have to figure out why do people stay, and what is it that I can create to get people to stay. That is something that I think you can do a little bit easier with teams that you've already been part of. But when you're looking at hiring this many people, how we as government leaders are able to create that same experience, those cultural, how do you onboard somebody that is brand new to your agency and show them those cultures, right? That some of the other people have already experienced and understand. So some of that becomes a little more difficult in a remote world is what I'm wondering. And if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it has occurred to me. One of my family members was hired the day before the lockout occurred, and she did not meet her immediate supervisor for 1 year in person. Mm-hmm. And she has a team. She has two teams she manages, and has some of that challenge anytime she's hired, and she shared with me. Yeah, acculturation for sure. Mm-hmm. It just seems to me that there are more people who like not necessarily having to get out of their pajama bottoms than they ever would have imagined 20 months ago.
Correct. Yeah, thank you.
I have Craig Dunn up next, and then Sadiq behind him, and then Gail on deck. So we're getting rolling. Go ahead, Craig.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Denny, for your service as Lieutenant Governor. Quick question. What are some of the top agenda items you anticipate occurring during the next upcoming legislative session?
Well, potentially transportation, because they had not yet reached agreement, and it appears as though they will not reach agreement on a transportation improvement package prior to January. Secondly, they have had the unbelievably unexpected and very fortunate gift of stronger revenue growth than ever anticipated. As you probably have heard at the last meeting of the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council here a 3 weeks ago, they updated their June forecast for the current biennium with a net increase of $1 billion. And so they're going to have some flexibility in all likelihood, if it holds up, to deal with some of the unmet needs as they agree upon from the last legislative session. Those are the two that spring to mind most immediately. We're going to continue to deal with issues associated with the pandemic. In what way, I do not know. I think it's fairly predictable that the governor is likely to be moving toward a child mandatory vaccination for coronavirus as the FDA and the CDC continue to affirm the safety of what we've developed by the different manufacturers. But there's never a limit of what people are going to want to try and take on. You put them in a legislative session, and there are no sideboards whatsoever on deliberation, only on the time allowed for them to undertake it. And again, in an even numbered year, this will be a 60-day session with a supplemental budget only.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to read a statement from Cindy Baugh. There are no longer geographic boundaries, so more employees can engage in the same way. And that was to the last question topic. I just didn't want to miss it. And with that, Sadiq's up, and then Dale behind him.
Thank you, and thank you for being here, Lieutenant Governor. Sadiq Summers, Department of Licensing. And I wanted to address the previous topic, actually. The whole concept of a hybrid work environment, I hear it spoken about a lot. And then we hear about facilities a lot too. But the reality is, as we move to a hybrid environment, we're going to have people at home at the same time that we have people in the office. And so there's going to be more need for collaborative spaces. So as far as facilities goes, in my opinion, while our headcount is going to be going down, we're going to need to use that space differently. We're going to need to have more areas where part of your team that's actually in the office is communicating with the other parts of your team that are elsewhere. So to me, and I understand there's a fear that there's going to be all this office space that we are locked into for the next decade that we're not using. But the reality is, if we use that space more wisely for our new needs, there might not be as much of a change where that's concerned as we think. And then, I'm glad they talked about retention, because my team is highly technical also. We have people that have a lot of education and a lot of skill, and we're competing with Amazon and Google and Intel. And the only reason that I'm able to retain these people is because they have the hearts of a public servant. They care about the work that they're doing, and we're providing them an environment that will work for their needs. So I have one employee who moved here from Texas within the last year, and he could have gone to work at Google, but he actually chose to work for state government because of the work that we do, because he's passionate about it, and because he can work from home while his wife has their first child. And to the possibility of having to tell him, no, you're going to have to commute to Olympia just because there's a policy here, even though we had the most productive year on record in the last 12 months, that's going to cause me to lose that employee. So we really need to think about that, especially in the tech environment. We need to think about that. And I encourage you to give that some thought too.
Thank you, Sadiq.
Dale, you're up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I work for the Department of Natural Resources. So we're working out this, what does remote working look like when we have a combination of field staff and in-office staff, staff who are near urban settings, and those who actually live in a rural community and conduct their work there. There's a not too long past history at DNR of folks that were quite comfortable and happy working alone in the woods and in various rural settings, and an increasing need for collaboration across disciplines, forest managers, wildlife biologists, engineers, geologists, marine biologists. So when we talk about in-person collaboration, there's the kind that happens around the hood of a pickup truck, which we've had to work our way through. During the initial outbreak, we had to talk about how we're going to do that even in an outdoor setting. So there's collaboration in person that happens in that setting. And then there's also collaboration that happens when we bring in or remote in these people that work in the field with people who work in the office, so that our strategic direction is synced up with the operational side of the agency. So not a question there, just a lot of the issues we're navigating our way through. We're nearing some conclusions about 100% telework and leading people. And we're headed towards a direction where if you're leading people, there has to be, on some level, the opportunity for in-person interaction, that we cannot do that 100% remotely. And I'll just kind of leave it at that, because that's something that's a conclusion I haven't reached 100%, but that's the direction we seem to be heading as an agency.
Thank you, Dale. That sounded like, however, the default would be remote, but with that pathway to in-person stuff. Did I misread that?
The default could be remote, right? But that at the direction of management, there is an expectation that you would show up in person for whatever that setting might look like. And then that raises for me questions of the idea of interperson. Typically, you're trying to build trust, you're trying to develop connection, and you're doing that if you're imposing it on someone, then you're already starting with the challenge in front of you, is that they really don't want to be there in person. They would rather be working remotely. And then how do you bridge? That's a challenge for me as I see it as a manager, is to model and foster the environment where that happens, that you bridge that gap between sort of the comfort, if you will, associated with remote working, and the reason why we have icebreakers when we get together, right, is to kind of bridge past that initial discomfort and get into where we're talking, having crucial conversations, and we're hearing everyone's perspective, everyone's ideas are getting into the idea pool. That to me, that is a challenge that in a way, the restrictions that the pandemic has imposed on us has actually opened up opportunities for us that weren't there before. We have Zoom calls where we have 50 different professionals on the line at one time, and I can't remember us ever doing that before. And perspectives are being shared, and collaboration at some level is happening. And how do you measure the productivity of that in the idea-based workplace, right? Some of that stuff is hard to measure.
Thank you.
Sadiq has his hand up.
Yeah, I have some comments on that, because I think I spent a lot of time talking with my staff as we moved to 100% remote and trying to figure out what the challenges were for them. And one of the challenges definitely is collaboration. They felt like they didn't have the rest of the team available to talk to enough. And that's all but been eliminated over the last year, because we now, we work in a Scrum environment already. So we have regular meetings. So now every morning, the entire team meets and they talk about not only what they're doing, but also how they're doing. And my team now is better connected and knows each other better on a personal level, which is really critical to function efficiently as a highly performing team. You need to know who you're working with to build trust, to know what their strengths and weaknesses are, and to be trusting enough to share openly your strengths and weaknesses so that we could all capitalize on all of that. And I think that is a skill that has to be cultivated to survive in a remote environment. And I think that's why a lot of people say, yes, you need to go back to the office, because otherwise you can't communicate and collaborate and meet as people. It can be done. It's just different and it's harder, and you have to learn how to do it. So I think there will need to be some training for people that are moving to or remaining in this 100% remote or hybrid environment to help them learn how to do that, because it's a different skill set. And as managers, those that aren't prepared for it are going to need to learn how.
Thank you. Again, thank you.
All right, we'll take another question here. JR, did you have this? I think we had a next question. It looks like the next question we had is, what should we be learning as leaders to prepare for the future?
That's a tough one. So maybe I'll help you with it, because I'm like, what should we? Because here's where I was thinking around that too is, and maybe it's more, what are you looking at, learning, thinking about, reading about as leaders? And specifically, I think leaders in state service, because everything I'm hearing, we just have this really unique place that we're in. And so looking back at the years that you've served and the things that you've seen, maybe even some of your key leadership wisdoms and learnings.
Assumes facts, not in evidence, JR, as the lawyer says in the courtroom.
Sure.
Well, I'm just a voracious reader. I mean, that's the bottom line. I subscribe to I don't know how many newspapers and periodicals online, and spend literally a couple hours a day reading through that material. That's the best way I know of to stay current.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, rather than the activity, it's the quality of leadership that I have always felt was most underappreciated, and that is curiosity. Give me people who are curious. Give me people who get up every day and want to know a little bit more about how it is their world works. And you know, there's some among us who are very curious, and some not very curious at all. And whether it's a burden I carry or not, I just was born wanting always to know more and more and more about everything around me. Now that I think about it, it is a burden.
It is a burden. I love that. What are you, if you don't mind my asking, and you don't have to answer, what are you reading right now? And I think we had a hand up, so then I'll turn over to that. But I'm always curious, because I'm also an avid reader, so I'm always like, what are you reading?
Well, I'm a member of a book club, and we just for our next book club adopted Stephen Breyer's Supreme Court Justice Breyer's book about the courts. I'm a member of a book club and have been for almost 30 years with a bunch of people that don't have a lot of time. So our first cut is fewer than 400 pages. Breyer's book's 128 pages, so it was the automatic winner of all the nominees. I'm reading a book called High Conflict. I'm reading another book, because I read more than one at a time, unfortunately, often, that is a novel about quantum computing. I'm writing a novel right now, which is about quantum computing. This is kind of a spy thing. Mine's more of an action thriller kind. So I wanted to see how other people treated the issue of quantum computing, which is an incredibly esoteric subject matter. And I'm always curious as to how it is that people represent what quantum computing is, because it's very difficult to explain to the layperson, including myself. I'm looking for the magic formula there. So I'm reading a lot right now.
Thank you.
They handed us all up with Paul Holt, but then I saw him go off camera. So I want to just make sure, Paul, are you able to be in the room at this moment?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thanks, Lieutenant Governor. I have a question. Earlier, you referenced that there are no sideboards in the breadth of policy setting, just in the duration of a given session. I'm curious, from your perspective, if there's anything that can be done to better ensure that we're attending to policy setting that's focused on our most pressing issues and problems. And then secondarily, that can ensure their efficacy or their effectiveness against the problems that the policies are set to attend to. So big question. Interested in your thoughts on that.
Real big and good question, Paul. The answer to the first part is no. The answer to the second part is elect people who do that. Look, the legislature is, if nothing else, a marketplace of ideas. And it is almost a laissez-faire marketplace of ideas. And so anybody who gets more votes than the other person is a absolute equal shareholder in the legislative corporation, as it were, and has the rights to advance and to promote and to introduce policy that may or may not relate to an underlying compelling problem statement, or may not be a good idea. The only criterion is, do you raise your right hand and get sworn in on the first day of the biennium or the first day of the legislative session to become a member, and then have at it. Cannot reduce this to a formula, Paul. You can't make it some kind of mathematical reductionist approach. This is about people who get elected to office bringing their values and their vision and their ideas to that marketplace, and in effect slugging it out to be one of the few that is at the end of the race. You know, the legislature is a little bit like Hunger Games. There's a finite amount of resource in the form of time available to enact things, and so it is truly survival of the fittest. Or the Squid Game. I guess I watched the first episode of Squid the other day. I don't know how many of you have done that, but if you haven't, you should prepare yourself for. JR liked it. She's smiling and nodding. Are you kidding me? That was
It's intense. It's
Yes.
intense. It's a ride, a journey you go on.
Yeah, you have a gift for understatement, JR. So no, you can't guarantee better outcomes except by electing better people.
Thank you.
We're making room for the next question. JR has a couple of other questions that we have in the queue. JR, did you have the next question?
I did. I have one that came in through a different avenue. I think maybe someone who's on the phone and can't email. And they were curious why you chose a career in public service. Like, what was that path?
So this is the story I tell often. My attraction to public service began in January of 1961. I was in the 3rd grade. My teacher's name, coincidentally, was Miss Heck. She was no relation to me. She's the first person I ever met in my life, had the same last name, which is quite unusual, to whom I was not related. Didn't think I liked her much at first. I grew to like her. She greeted me at the door the first day and grabbed my cheek with her fingers and said, "Oh, so you're the little boy with the same last name as me." I was pretty determined not to like her at that point, but couldn't help myself. I eventually did. She did something in January that was absolutely stunning. Now, mind you, I grew up in rural Clark County. And in 1960 and 61, there were a whole lot of people in the neighborhood didn't have television sets yet. For sure, did not have television sets. Well, what she did in January was roll a TV set into the classroom. And we were all amazed. Here it came in on wheels and, with the rabbit ears, because there was no cable then. And wow, TV in the classroom. This is incredible. Half our class didn't have TV. Wow, what are we going to watch? Well, what we were going to watch was the inauguration of John Fitzgerald Kennedy as President of the United States. I was bit on the spot. Lifelong malady. I tell some people it's a congenital birth defect that I was born wanting to pursue this. But that's really its origin. Then I was in college. I got a job with the state legislature. I looked around me and I was very young and full of myself, frankly, a lot of hubris. Thought I can do this better than these people. So I moved home and ran and was elected in 1976 at the age of 24 because I thought I could do it better than them. I'd like to think, frankly, that as I grew older, that my motivation came from a place of greater humility than it did when I was a younger person. I'd like to think that, but as I remind everybody, anybody who claims to be humble is by definition not. So I'm not going to go all that distance on that assertion. But look, at the end of the day, I will say this, which is really the direct answer to your question. In my humble opinion, there's only one reason to run for public office, and that is to make a difference. That's the only reason. It's because you think you can get in here and do something that makes it better for somebody else in life. And that is, in fact, why I left the private sector to run for Congress after being out of public service for quite some time, because I thought I had something to offer that I thought could help people.
Thank you. Hear, hear. I don't know how to follow up on that one because it's so true. I know that we have space or time, I should say, for a couple of more questions. So
Want to hear the story about Miss Heck?
yeah, tell us the story about Miss Heck while we're waiting.
So several years ago, I wrote my memoir called Lucky Bounce. And in it, I tell this origin story about my interest in public service, starting when she rolled the TV in for us to watch the inauguration. But I also told the story about her grabbing my cheek and how I did much like her. So the book's at the publishers. And I'm sitting in my office in Washington, D.C. One of my staff people comes in with a letter and says, I think you're going to want to read this. Now, mind you, Miss Heck taught the year I was in third grade and then disappeared the next year. So I had not seen her in the better part of 60 years. And lays this letter down in front of me and it says, Dear Congressman Heck, I hope you remember me. I'm Joanne Heck. I was your third grade teacher. I always knew you would amount to something in life, that energetic little boy who sat in the front row and always wanted to participate in things. And I'm thinking I have written in my book, which is at the publisher, I didn't much like this person when she did that. And so I stopped reading and I picked up the phone and I called the publisher and I said, stop the printing. I've got one more edit I need to make. And I was very lucky. I was able to change some words there before the book was printed, and I sent her a copy. She had moved to England to teach in one of those Patriots or Americans overseas schools and lived out her life over there.
What a
you never
fantastic
know.
story.
You never know when your third grade teacher is going to live to be 90 and keep track of you.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. Thank you.
It looks like we have a question. Daryl, I don't know if you're prepared to ask that question. Maybe he's having spotty internet, so I'm going to give him a second to see if he can climb on or not. And the question is, and this is a big question, is you mentioned on social media, you're mentioned on social media with aggressive adversarial attitude gets more followers. We are seeing an increase in this behavior in the physical arena. What is the state's leadership thinking on this and the cause, the trend, et cetera? And what is the state doing on this trend and behavior?
Well, the state's a pretty amorphous term. By the way, that's a great question. I can't speak for the other parts, the other leadership parts of the state. I can tell you what I'm trying to do, which is model the kind of behavior I wish there were more of. I don't engage in ad hominem in my tweets whatsoever, or my social media post. I don't engage in what I would characterize as either hyper or hyperbolic partisanship. When I'm the presiding officer of the Senate, I try very hard to set a civil tone. My premise is pretty straightforward, which is, the legislature is where these people from all over the state come from, a very pluralistic state. I mean, there's lots of diversity in our state, and diversity of philosophy and ideology and values as well. And that's where we work it all out. So there are going to be tensions and conflict and friction between these competing values and visions. And there should be, because, well, God, by golly, that's the definition of democracy. But democracy doesn't work if it devolves into personal name calling. Because here's the reason why. The person you may disagree with today may be the exact person you need to be able to figure out something with tomorrow because they agree with you on the second issue. And it's real hard to get together with somebody tomorrow who you spent today calling an SOB and 923 permutations of that. So I think it's important to the health of the democracy that things not get personal, because otherwise it makes it very difficult to get to yes among competing points of view. It gets harder and harder. And indeed, frankly, I would suggest to you that that's exactly what we're observing on the national scene right now.
Thank you so much. And I think our concluding question for this session today is going to go to Sadiq.
Thank you. I was just wondering, like, what you do to promote informed decision making, and to add to that, how do you make sure that the information you're getting isn't biased in some way?
Well, I'm a data freak. I'd like to think that we need to be evidence-based. We need to be data-driven in order to make informed decisions. One of the things that I teach young people, I sermonize on it, is the importance in the policymaking process to first advance a clear, cogent, data-driven, evidence-based problem statement. That's where you begin. You know, you begin with the problem statement. You don't begin with the solution. Solutions change the status quo, the most powerful force on the face of the earth. And it requires people to change the way they do things. That immediately alienates people. So where you begin is the problem statement. Here's the problem. And that creates an authorizing environment wherein you can have a healthier debate about where it is that we ought to go. So just today, I was working with our economic consultant in my capacity as chair of the Legislative Committee on Economic Development. We had a section on housing, which is a pet issue of mine, and I like the space very much. And we got a huge problem in this country. We still have broadly shared aspiration to home ownership, but the racial disparity is just almost heartbreaking. It's like 70-some% of white families own homes, 44%, almost half, of Black families own their homes. And we know, of course, that this is the legacy of redlining that continues to play out intergenerationally. We know other things. We know that the net worth of the average house, the number one net worth building tool of the average American family is the equity in their home. So we are systematically cutting out a portion of our country. These are all facts. And I find that when we get these facts on the table, then when we start to get to solution like down payment assistance programs, people are more receptive to them. I'm just using that, Sadiq, as an example of how it is that I think you could advance informed decision-making on the policy front. If that was the last question, Yvonne, I need to express my gratitude to allowing me to come back and apologize again for the early exit in the spring. And I also need to thank you again for the job you do day in and day out. You know, I have an enormous amount of respect for the executive branch employees that make this thing work. And if I didn't have it before I was chief of staff to Governor Gardner, I certainly had it after it. You are so, so important to our state, and I am deeply grateful to you for all that you do. I'm only hoping that there will be another Distinguished Managers Award event in person. The governor cannot be there. And instead of asking his chief of staff, he'll ask the lieutenant governor to come and present those because they are incredibly uplifting and heartwarming. So thank you very, very much.
Our pleasure, and thank you as well.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And I will tell you, I have taken a couple things away that you said today, and I'm sure others have too, but I loved the conversation around curiosity as leaders. I do think that's so important. And, you know, you tied into it with talking about starting with problem statements and how many times we try to jump to a solution when we don't fully understand what the problem even is that we're trying to solve for. And it really ties back to curiosity. And then the other thing for me,